Hello there, this is Zara Imtiaz from Asian Agribiz. My colleague Rajeshwari Ramani spoke to Manuel van Sant, the Regional Director Sales, Poultry Asia and Oceania, about the difference in investing in either a greenfield project or adding on to an existing one. The data we gathered here is one that will be useful for the processing industry players mulling on automation and precisioning for slaughter operations.
Hi, Manuel. Welcome to our Asian Agribiz podcast chat.
Hi, Rush. Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Manuel, we have spoken before on how meat processing has taken off in Asia due to more sophisticated consumption trends and convenience aspects. So, as interest in this area is gaining, I'd like to ask you, what is the benefit of upgrading an existing processing facility over constructing a new one?
Yeah, Rush, that is, of course, a good question, and I think there is not a uniform answer. So to really answer this question, we have to look at which scenario the processor is operating in or would like to move towards.
Mhm.
So in general, there are a lot of course, requirements, and in terms of footprint, in terms of installation, which ultimately are determined by the needs of the upgrade or the needs of the processor. So we have to understand really clearly what is the goal, what are the underlying starting points on the market, on the product, on the process, and what is the matching solution that is going to satisfy these requirements. And then already probably we have a clear indication whether it's even possible to do an upgrade or it requires like a real brownfield or even a greenfield project. Of course, if it's feasible to do an upgrade, yeah, usually it means that the time to market, so the time of setting up the project, actually taking a decision on what it needs to be, including all the designs and having all the external factors in order, like licenses, etc., up to the moment that you're actually producing, of course, a lot shorter than when you have to come up with a completely new plant. Same time, civil works, acquiring land, all these things take time, are also costly. So a new project will usually have a lot bigger investment requirement compared to an upgrade. So this would be the biggest benefit. For a new plant, you have to consider that the equipment part, so the scope of supply that Marel provides, is only around 10 to 15% of the total investment. So there's a lot around it that needs to be invested in, that needs to be put up to have actually complete plant. With an upgrade, of course, there is still additional cost compared to the equipment, but depending on what is required, it's going to be a lot less.
Okay, so I didn't realize that probably like building a new processing facility might actually take a longer time because of the licensing and permit issues, depending on the countries.
Yeah, that's going to have a big impact. And of course, the processors, the people listening to this will understand for their own situation what that actually looks like, how difficult it is to get those permits, and what kind of conversations are involved. But in general, for an upgrade, you have to count, I think, a year from the moment that you are ready to take a decision to the moment you're actually having products coming out of the new line. If it's a greenfield, it easily adds another year from the moment that you have, let's say, the idea submitted to whatever council or whatever body you're talking to get the permit, then processing time for the permit, revisions, and then you're ready to actually put the architect to work for the finalizing of all the details and ordering the equipment with us, etc.
Okay, so that means like I'm just thinking like in cost wise, we always think about cost wise, okay, the investment in the actual product or the equipment itself. But when you think about cost wise, it's also regarding all these other things, cost and
Oh,
effort. Yeah, effort is also a cost as
absolutely.
well. So
Yeah, absolutely. That is a big factor.
okay, that's great. Okay, so what are the main points to look at when upgrading or investing in a new plant?
Yeah, so I think it starts with what we just discussed and
Mm-hmm.
really understanding the market share that they are trying to capture or maintain.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that market share, so if they want to move into, for example, QSR production, comes with very clear requirements in terms of product specifications, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of volumes for certain contracts that they might be able to bid for or whatever the process is. But it
Mm-hmm.
needs to be clear what volume we're targeting, what the requirements of that volume are,
Yeah.
and what the corresponding timeline is. So, of course, if there is already an existing contract and we want to reduce labor as fast as we can because of costing of the product, then the timeline might be much more urgent compared to a situation where it's a future direction for the company. They focus on the local market today, but they want to grow into QSR in the future. So these are already two very different starting points, right?
Yeah.
Now, if we have those requirements clear, then next step is to determine, okay, how much resources does it actually make sense to allocate to those requirements? So how much money are we going to invest? And there's, of course, a discussion where we can help to give budgets or certain indications of the different scenarios. And yeah, how much money does it actually make sense to invest? You know, how certain is that market share, and how quick do we see a return on investment? And if you have those two things clear, I think you're already looking at one scenario or the other. Now, then ultimately, if that's not completely clear yet, then the process that is fitting to the identified requirements and the corresponding scope, so the corresponding equipment that you need to satisfy those requirements, will dictate what is necessary. So to make that more clear, what I mean to say by that is that the footprint of the line, the requirements surrounding the line, the cold storage or whatever is needed to capture the end products, whatever is needed in terms of supply to the line, that will give you a certain footprint, a certain requirements list that will
Yeah.
very easily fit into a certain space, existing plant or not.
Right. Okay, so can you tell us about the new systems which are available, which may not be suitable for older facilities, and what would be the next solution?
Yeah, so in my experience, it's all about footprint with older facilities, especially because these facilities have been built at the time where the secondary process was all completely done with labor, or almost completely done with labor. Um, yeah, and then over time, usually these facilities also increased their throughput. So they went up in capacity in terms of number of birds per hour. So usually all the available space has already been consumed by the equipment that's standing in the plant, especially in the primary process. And the secondary process is encapsulated by storage, cold storage, the primary process on the other side, chillers. So there's not that much room, or usually no room at all, to expand that area. Yeah, if you then want to put in a certain line, like a further processing line from beginning to end, from meat prep all the way up to and including the packing after freezing, yeah, that requires a certain length, which is usually not there, especially if it's a higher volume line. So it's really about the footprint again.
Yeah.
And so any equipment, any line requiring a large footprint is usually difficult in an older facility. Now, to work around that, if it's not feasible or not smart to invest in a new plant, then of course we can look at breaking the complete process up into parts, let's say blocks, to try and fit in the space available. Also, we looking at modular systems, of course, we can decide to try and find a balance between full automation and labor. So a balanced combined solution where less footprint is required. So there are workarounds, but usually they do require some kind of compromise. That's inevitable.
Okay, so I was going to ask you for the next question, like how would you help processors plan? So I guess that would be how you would help.
Yeah, so you'll get tired of me saying this, but basically, again, it's about these starting points. So
Yeah.
what is the target market? What is the
Mhm.
product?
Mhm.
What are the key value parameters to
Mhm.
capture or satisfy that market? So what will actually the customer of our customer appreciate or look for when buying the products? Then, of course, if you have that combination, so the market product and the added value, you also know what is the process required to actually get to that product with those parameters. You'll balance that with how much money do we want to invest, what is the throughput requirement, and what is the quality requirement, and with the timeline. So when are we ready to invest? When does it need to be operational? That is on the requirements part. Then the next thing we'll look at is what are the external factors that are at play. These are the licenses, permits we've discussed before, availability of land, of course, outside of our scope to help to look for land, but of course we can indicate how much size would be needed or what the building size would need to be to help that process. And yeah, based on the requirements, the external factors will define an overall objective. So both sides should mutually agree on this is what we want to do, and then we'll build the matching solution once that's clear. So at the end of the process, we'll come to a sort of a concluding moment where our customer will say, okay, it's clear we need to go for an upgrade, and this is more or less what it should look like. Then we'll build that matching solution in a layout and of course a proposal. Or they will say, okay, this is very clear, we need to go for a new plant, and then we'll do the same thing for that scenario.
That is a really good point, because going back to when you said, about footprints and all that, and it's a good point that you brought up, saying that, if they really need to find another place to build maybe a further processing facility or something, that you are already there to help them plan that, and also they know how much of space they need to actually build that.
Yeah, of course. And there is a certain detail level that, of course, makes sense to look at. It doesn't make sense to look at each individual piece of equipment and configure that exactly as it needs to be, because those requirements can change all the time throughout the process, and even after the equipment is installed, it can still change. But I think it's very important to start at that higher, more abstract level to make the right decision. Otherwise, the risk is that you decide on the scenario before understanding all the requirements, and then before you know it, you're stuck in that scenario, whilst it might not be the best solution.
Yes, correct. Absolutely correct. So just to throw out a question, you've been around in the region for quite a long time. So what are some of the older facilities that you've seen in the countries?
Yeah, that depends. That depends quite a bit on the market, I would say. The older facilities typically started as plants for whole bird production. So meaning after chilling, the eviscerated product or the griller, either with heads and feet on or heads or feet off, is graded to different weight grades and then packed, bagged, or trushed, bagged, and shipped to either a quote unquote wet market or some kind of local channel. There's still quite a lot of those around, and the problem there is that they didn't really incorporate any space almost for the secondary processing, let alone further processing. So for those plants, they will really struggle with what we just discussed. You know, the area being completely blocked in by freezers and storage, things that are difficult to move without basically completely reconstructing the site. Now, downtime is usually something that's not accepted or once needs to be avoided as much as possible because these are running functional plants. So in a changeover time of maybe a weekend or a few weekends up to a week, there's only so much, of course, that you can do in terms of civil works and reconstruction. So these plans are the ones that I think ultimately get consolidated into new plants, bigger plants, possibly also in different locations. Because even in a mature market like Thailand, there are still processing plants that have now been sort of consumed by apartment buildings and different compounds, living estates, just because the cities that they were built close to have grown so much in the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Definitely quite common in our region, I would say. And of course, if it's a scenario where the footprint is just not there, there's no possibility to expand, then you'll need to at some moment think about adding a new plant next to keeping that one in operation or just replacing it completely.
So looking at the trend playing out in the region, so we actually talked about it, that there are a lot of facilities which are like that. So do you think, would I be right to say that we might see a bit more of new buildings instead of upgrades in the region?
Yeah, depends on the market, and I know that's an easy way to answer the question, but I think in some markets like let's take for example Thailand, just because of the maturity of the industry, the focus on both export and the domestic market, the amount of big players that are active here. I think it will be really a mix. It's not just new plants, but it is also upgrade of existing ones to try and modernize or capture slightly different volumes compared to what is being produced today in a way that it's as quick as possible. At the same time, the volume is still growing, so inevitably there will be new plants as well. In other markets like really, let's say outside of Southeast Asia, but maybe India as an example, still so much volume that needs to be industrialized that the focus is probably going to be a lot on new plants as well as capacity expansion of the existing ones, just to satisfy that ever-growing volume. If we just take a look Europe, and not because to really draw a comparison, but more to see, okay, what does a mature market really look like after a certain amount of time? There you see that the regulation is now so strict around putting up new farms, putting up new plants, that they almost have no other option than to really upgrade what they already have. So of course you can imagine that in Asian countries, at some moment that is going to become more and more a factor, and probably it already is.
Yes, correct. But it's also, I would think that Asian markets like Indonesia, Thailand, and even Malaysia to some extent, and of course Philippines as well. Like the space is still there. There's not just the
Yeah.
consumption, and the land and the space is still there. So the opportunity of building new plants is very much there as well, I would say.
Yeah. Although I have to say that if you do, and yes, that's of course 100% correct. At the same time, if you zoom into that, then the conditions are still quite different, and maybe sometimes more difficult than you would expect. So in the Philippines, it seems to be more difficult than you'd expect to actually acquire suitable land. Also there, the water treatment, or let's say all the water treatment requirements, as an example, quite strict. And this is of course something that we can support, but they are more strict than maybe somebody outside of the Philippines would think or would realize. In Indonesia, of course, volume expansion is always linked to the live bird chain, right? To the so if you want to put up more parent stock, have a bigger live bird supply chain, then also you need to invest in processing. So there is always, I think, quite a strong drive to put up new plants, new lines. So yeah, again, it's definitely true what you're saying, and the local conditions are quite different per country, I'd say.
Yeah. You're talking about the back-end infrastructure needs to be there as well.
Yeah, of course, that's also a very good point. So that needs to be there as well, and yeah, that mostly determines then what the capacity of these new plants is going to be. Because if you're producing a very high volume, but you don't have the back end chain in the region to take away that volume, make sure it goes to the store in the right condition, then of course it still doesn't work. So ultimately, all those things need to be in balance.
I'm just thinking in terms of like how most of the countries in Southeast Asia works is basically you look at the rural and the city areas where the back-end infrastructure is much better, whereas if you go a bit outside, it might not be that great. So that would be one of the problems that you need to explore as well before you think about setting up a new plant.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. And then at the same time, you also need to get the birds there.
Yes,
right?
Correct. Yeah.
So it tends to be a sort of a split between having the live bird fly and having the farms close to the site, and also being close to where you actually need to supply the product.
Yep. Quite a complicated situation, huh?
Yeah. Right. But there's definitely plenty of potential to expand, and there will be considerable amount of new lines installed in the near future and also beyond that.
Okay, so let's look at the just one last question, looking at the shelf life, whether it's an upgrade or it's actually a new building. What kind of a shelf life are we looking at with what is available in technology right now?
Yeah, so that's of course a good question. Depends really again on the solution that we're talking about. So if we look to the primary process, and I know that's not the key topic of our discussion, but still, that's where of course the material for the secondary process and the further processing is coming from. Yeah, this equipment is now, of course, it's forever developing. It's now entering sort of a digital era where there's more and more insight, there's more and more data that's available for the processors to rely less on skilled labor. The principles, so the mechanical principles, the actual actions done by these machines are, of course, also developing. But that's not to say that lower capacity or older equipment cannot do the job. So the lifetime of this equipment tends to be quite long. So if we typically look at a write-off period of maybe 10 years for a capital investment, we have lines running in, let's say, Malaysia, that
Yeah.
have already been installed much longer than 10 years ago. Evisceration lines or killing and defeathering lines that are significantly older than that. So the lifetime of that equipment exceeds the write-off period. Now, I think for the current technology, that is still the case for a lot of equipment as well. Where I do see a difference compared to before is that, of course, with really the back-end equipment like a bone detection or graders, packaging solutions. Of course, these pieces of equipment, they have an HMI, they have PLCs, they have quite a lot of tech included in them, and that tech is developing quite fast. Now, I think the pace at which it is developing is not as fast as with consumer products like phones, for example. But still, of course, this kind of technology maybe has a little bit shorter shelf life than the mechanical equipment used to have in the past. So what we try to do is that if we have, for example, a breast deboning system, can take the generation that you have today with the tech that you have today and actually upgrade it, keeping the mechanical components very similar with the latest PLC and the latest software and hardware that belongs to that. So the shelf life then as a result is still the same as it used to be, let's say 20 years ago. But for end, we keep extending the shelf life of the mechanical part of the equipment with new control. And this is quite important, I think, moving forward. Because again, this whole cycle of software and corresponding hardware moves faster than the traditional mechanical equipment that used to be installed in the plants.
Right. So basically, like if you're talking about things like camera systems, detection units, and all that, like if it's something that you can detach, you can actually detach it and like come up or like use a new one with a better monitoring system or a better programming or something like that. So that's basically, that's basically where the shelf life can be extended.
Yeah. So we really try to think about the life cycle of the equipment. So we know that, of course, the absolute minimum is 10 years, but it should be, or we try to aim for a longer life cycle. So how can we set it up in such a way that through upgrades, partial replacements of some controllers and PLCs, we can actually keep extending that lifetime. And within Marel, we actually we also try to standardize that kind of hardware. So meaning that if you have multiple pieces of equipment installed in the plant, you from a spare part perspective, you can actually have the same type of controllers in stock. Doesn't matter where in the process that equipment is sitting. So that's also to make it a little bit easier to manage the lifetime of the equipment.
Yeah, I would think that equipment suppliers like Marel, would actually like think about detachable or modular designs, which can be extended instead of, processors looking in the future that they have to like change a whole piece of equipment.
Yeah, exactly. So that is definitely something we try to do, and the point I'm trying to make is this is something that we need to think about because this life cycle of the later tech is shorter than again what the industry is used to and what was the standard maybe 20 30 years ago, or even earlier or less long ago than that.
That's some very excellent insights you have given us, Manuel. Thank you for coming and having this chat with me today to explore why or why not invest in a new plant or upgrade an existing one. I hope to speak to you again for another topic regarding meat processing.
Okay, well, my pleasure, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to another edition on our Asian Agribiz podcast. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and share it among your industry colleagues. Do check for the latest podcasts on how the industry is moving in these challenging times by visiting www.asian-agribiz.com. I'm Zara signing off for Asian Agribiz.